My name's Steve Norris. I'm chairman of Highways UK and delighted to welcome you all to what I'm pretty sure you already know will be a really stimulating 2 days of exhibition and conference. Good to know that for once in the budget somebody remembered to insert the word roads, although I'm pretty sure that Jim O'Sullivan will tell us it's just how the Treasury always packages it up so that it always looks as if you got more money, and then amazingly it always turns out to be what you thought you had yesterday. But setting that aside, we've got a challenging couple of days, some marvelous speakers, and to start us off this morning, it's a real pleasure for me to introduce Sir John Armitt. Now, I suspect everybody in this room knows Sir John, who's been involved in construction, in civil engineering, and particularly in transport, in rail and in road and elsewhere, all of his working life, and who's now the chairman of the National Infrastructure Commission. Nobody has a better view, if you like, of infrastructure in general, civil engineering experience, and of course, in particular, an understanding of the challenges facing those of us in the roads industry. So it's a real pleasure for me, and please give a warm welcome to our introductory speaker, Sir John Armitt.
Well, thank you, Steve, and good morning, everyone. I say what a pleasure it is to be here today. Right, it's now 123 years since Evelyn Ellis undertook the UK's first car journey, driving from Micheldever in Hampshire to his home in Berkshire in June 1895. He was also the first motorist to break the law, as he didn't have a red flag being carried in front of him. 1 year later, that law had been changed, and 5 years later, there were around 700 cars on the road. By 1930, the number had reached 1 million. We're facing no less of a revolution on our roads today. The number of driving tests being taken has fallen over the past year, while at the same time, people are choosing alternatives, such as cycling, public transport, and services such as Uber to get from A to B. Those that do choose to drive are increasingly turning their back on petrol and diesel, with sales of electric, hybrid, and hybrid plug-ins up by a fifth in the last year. Research continues at a pace to bring connected and autonomous vehicles onto Britain's roads, with trials taking place right here in the West Midlands as well as elsewhere. We cannot sit back and hope that these developments will simply fall into place and into line with our road network as it currently operates. Our job, whether as policymakers, transport planners, economists or engineers, must be to ensure that the infrastructure that we have adapts to meet these changing demands. That's why the National Infrastructure Assessment, the first of its kind for the UK and the first of its scale anywhere in the world, includes recommendations to improve public transport, help people to buy electric cars with confidence, and ensure our roads are designed to meet the needs of the future. Nowhere is this more pressing than in our cities. Research for the National Infrastructure Commission shows that 25 areas of the country suffering the worst congestion are cities. Whilst London remains in the unenviable pole position, places like Manchester, Nottingham, Leeds, and of course Birmingham are not far behind. The reasons for this will be complex and will vary wildly from place to place, so we cannot simply look to Whitehall for solutions. That's why we want to see powers and 43 billion of funding above current spending levels between now and 2040 provided to the metro mayors and local leaders so that they can develop their own transport strategies. As Andy Burnham and Andy Street have just said today, and I would urge you to read their comments in today's Times Red Box, this will enable cities themselves to tackle the issues that their areas face. And the long-term plans that they devise should also include measures to unlock job opportunities and much-needed new housing for their communities. For those who continue to choose the car as their mode of transport, the future will be electric. One of the biggest barriers facing those looking to buy these new vehicles is range anxiety. How people charge their electric vehicles is likely to be very different to how they refill conventional cars, topping up at home and overnight or in the workplace rather than filling up at stations. But before they part with their cash for their car, drivers will want to know that the battery in that new car will contain enough power to get them to their destination and that there will be somewhere to recharge when they arrive, wherever that is. The private sector will eventually deliver charging points across the country. But as the experience of rolling out mobile and broadband connections shows us, it's the rural and remote areas who can end up waiting for the longest for the services to arrive. Fortunately, the private sector is willing to invest, with over 1,900 new locations being added to the network in the last year, and the total number of connection points nearly now 20,000. But it's still not enough. Some places are likely to remain uneconomic in the short term, just as we've seen with mobile phone masts and other infrastructure. Indeed, the Business Select Committee in the House of Commons recently described the UK's electric car charging infrastructure as not fit for purpose, with their findings mirroring much of what we've recommended in our National Infrastructure Assessment. We've urged the government to subsidise new rapid charging points where the private sector won't deliver in the short term, and accelerate the provision of a national network to address range anxiety at low cost. And for councils to allocate a portion of their parking spaces for future chargers to help create a truly national visible charging network. All this should be designed to support 100% electric car and van sales by 2030, 10 years earlier than ministers currently plan for. And alongside electric vehicles, we also need to plan for driverless cars too. Companies like Tesla, Toyota, Honda and Hyundai are investing millions of pounds in the development of this new technology, while service providers like Addison Lee and Uber are also working in the field. But so much attention has been focused on what's happening under the bonnet, but there's been relatively little thought to how we can prepare our roads for the arrival of these new vehicles. That's why this year, working with Highways England and Innovate UK, we at the National Infrastructure Commission ran our own Roads for the Future competition. Launched in January, it sought ideas from the brightest and best for how driverless cars and traditionally driven vehicles can coexist on Britain's roads. We weren't looking for how new infrastructure could be built, but how our existing network could be adapted to this purpose. We wanted to see how new innovations like artificial intelligence and machine learning could be applied to the challenge. We had a great response, with 81 entries to our competition from a range of different organisations, each coming up with creative and innovative solutions. The 5 ideas that were shortlisted included smart traffic lights, flexible use of curbsides during the course of the day, ever-improving sat-nav technology that could learn better routes for the cars to take. While sadly I can't stay for the whole of the conference today, our joint winners, City Science and Leeds City Council, will be here later this afternoon to explain their proposals for developing roads for the future. I'd urge you to attend and hear about all that they have put together and now why they've reached the conclusions they have. We also need to think about our freight system, how that will develop and what that will mean for our roads, both the strategic links that provide the backbones for the UK's haulage industry, but also the urban and local networks by which goods reach their final consumer. All right, can't turn the page. For that reason, we're currently conducting a study into the future of freight in the UK, which is considering how the efficiency of the system can be maximised, whilst tackling its negative impacts on congestion and the environment. That study will publish its final report next spring. We rely on our road networks for the majority of our journeys, whether that's visiting family, transporting goods across the country, or simply getting home from work at the end of each day. That's clearly reflected in the budget announcements last week, with £25.5 billion for motorways and A roads between 2020 and 25, £3.5 billion for the important local routes, and 420 million for tackling potholes next year, and an increase of 680 million in the Transforming Cities Fund to 2.4 billion. And whether it's electric vehicles or driverless cars, it's likely to remain the case. So our roads need to adapt to changing demands and ever-changing technologies. That means greater use of public transport within our cities, charging points across our country to support electric cars, and the potential for a complete redesign to enable connected and autonomous vehicles to operate safely and efficiently. All of that requires a wider national strategy for our infrastructure, in which funding for our roads is one part, and as well as improving our transport networks, it needs to include plans for future energy provision, access to technology like full fibre broadband, and all while tackling the threat of climate change. In his budget statement, the Chancellor promised that a national infrastructure strategy would be published as a response to our national infrastructure assessment. This would be the best way for our recommendations to be implemented. But if government is to accept our recommendations, we need the support from everyone in this room for what we have proposed and for those changes to be put into practice. That means stating the case clearly, whether to MPs from different political parties, ministers, or the media. That and the positive response to our Roads for the Future competition will show that there's certainly an appetite from industry leaders to rise to the challenges that these issues present. I would ask you all now to work with us to encourage ministers to follow our advice and to give you the tools that you need to help shape our country's roads and our wider infrastructure for decades to come. Thank you very much.